11:30 p.m. Across America, millions of families switch off the lights and turn on the TV. The familiar theme song of The Tonight Show begins to play, signaling the start of the entertainment hour. Johnny Carson walks out, smooth, confident, and quick with a joke, ready to welcome the biggest names in Hollywood. But look a little closer. Behind those million-dollar smiles are trembling hands hidden under chairs and nervous eyes shining under the bright lights. Are their pupils reacting normally? Or are chemicals already racing through their bodies? These guests are legends, actors, icons, comedy stars. But some of them are walking onto live television while battling powerful substances in their systems: cocaine, heroin, painkillers, and heavy alcohol. They aren't acting wild. They are holding themselves together with pure survival instinct, trying to look normal while their bodies fight pain, withdrawal, or exhaustion. Welcome to the dark backstage world of The Tonight Show, where even the biggest stars sometimes arrived barely holding it together. One of the most shocking examples was Elizabeth Taylor and her dangerous routine with painkillers. Inside NBC Studio One in Burbank, the spotlights burn hot enough to melt makeup, yet Elizabeth Taylor feels freezing cold. A deep chill runs down her spine, not from the air conditioning, but from a body begging for relief. Back in her dressing room, away from the crowd, the legendary actress is shaking. On the vanity table sits a glass of watered-down vodka and a blister pack of pills. Between expensive perfume bottles and tonight's script lies the thing she wants most. She swallows 2 Percodan pills, powerful opioid painkillers, then takes a quick drink of liquor to wash them down. It's a routine she jokingly calls the breakfast of champions. Within minutes, the chemicals begin to work. The stabbing pain in her back slowly fades, replaced by a heavy numbness spreading through her body. Her pupils shrink to tiny points, a clear sign of opioid use. But under the blazing studio lights, nobody notices. Her vision blurs slightly, like she's looking through cloudy glass. She leans back in the chair, a soft smile forming without her even realizing it. Then a knock on the door. 5 minutes to air, Ms. Taylor. The voice sounds distant, like it's echoing from far away. Elizabeth takes a moment to gather herself and stand up. Her legs feel weak, almost rubbery, but the drugs push her forward. Moments later, Johnny Carson announces her name, and the audience explodes with applause. Very different. She barely feels the ground. Very different. She barely feels the ground beneath her feet. Johnny Carson instantly notices the faint smell of alcohol mixed with peppermint. As he guides her to the chair, he feels her lean slightly heavier on his arm than usual. Her hands are cold and damp with sweat. The interview begins, and inside Elizabeth's mind a quiet battle is unfolding. Her mouth is completely dry, a classic side effect of opioids. When Johnny asks about her latest film, she opens her mouth, but the words struggle to come out. She lets out a small laugh instead and reaches for the water glass. To the audience, it looks like a graceful movement. Johnny sees the truth. It's a desperate attempt to get her voice working again. "Liz, you look radiant recently," Johnny says, watching her carefully. Elizabeth blinks slowly while her brain processes the sentence. Inside her head, thoughts drift around like loose papers in the wind. She knows she should answer with something clever, but the haze in her mind whispers, "Just sit there, relax, smile." She bites down on her gum to snap herself back. "Thank you, Johnny," she replies. To the audience, her voice sounds normal, but in her own ears it echoes strangely, like someone else is speaking. At moments, her gaze drifts past Johnny and into empty space. She twists her diamond ring again and again without realizing it, a nervous habit many people develop when their system is overstimulated. Johnny, a veteran of live television, carefully keeps the conversation moving whenever Elizabeth pauses too long or loses her train of thought. At times, he practically becomes a quiet safety net, guiding the interview so things don't fall apart on live TV. Then the audience bursts into laughter at a joke. For most people, it's harmless noise, but for a nervous system flooded with painkillers and alcohol, the sound hits like a sudden explosion. Ends and the red light switches off. Ends and the red light switches off. Elizabeth collapses back into her chair like an empty bag of sand. The artificial energy from the drugs begins fading fast. She rubs her eyes, smearing mascara slightly. "I need to go backstage," she whispers quietly. Johnny nods, calling an assistant. "There is another dose waiting inside." There is another dose waiting inside. The audience just watched a legendary Hollywood icon. But behind the curtain, the real story is a star fighting a silent battle while the show goes on. Bert bared his teeth in a crooked grin, his smile slightly twisted because his jaw still throbbed from the injury. The audience thought it was his usual playful smirk. "Well, actually I'm on the alien diet, Johnny," Bert joked, his voice light but fragile like thin glass. It was a lie. He wasn't dieting at all. The jaw injury from the city heat accident made chewing almost impossible. Every bite felt like punishment, and the powerful sleeping pills had wiped out his appetite completely. He was slowly starving right in front of millions of viewers, hiding it behind dry humor. Johnny laughed politely, but his eyes stayed serious. He recognized that distant stare. It was the empty look people sometimes get when heavy sedatives take over. Bert's eyes didn't focus on Johnny or the audience. They drifted past the cameras, staring into space as if something else existed there. When the interview ended and the stage lights dimmed, Burt Reynolds collapsed back into reality. The charming movie star mask slipped away, revealing a man barely holding himself together. He tried to stand up but couldn't. An assistant rushed forward to hold him upright. As they helped him move, a quiet groan escaped through his teeth. The pain in his jaw was coming back as the medication began fading. Step by step, Burt shuffled into the dim backstage hallway. On television, he was still the charming legend everyone loved. But behind the curtain, he looked like a ghost, thin, exhausted, and trapped in a battle with the pills that had taken over his life. June 1968. The air inside the Tonight Show studio in New York felt unusually heavy. When Johnny Carson announced the next guest, Judy Garland, the audience erupted into thunderous applause. Behind the curtain, however, the scene was much darker. The small woman trembling in a sparkling dress was not just the beloved Dorothy who once guided audiences through the magical land of Oz. She was a performer worn down by decades of dependence on stimulants and sedatives that began when she was still a teenager working long hours on the MGM studio lot. Back in the dressing room, Judy had gone through a familiar ritual just to stand upright. Her thin hands gripped the vanity table. Beside her makeup sat two pill bottles she knew too well, one filled with amphetamines to force energy into her tired body, the other with barbiturates meant to quiet the anxiety inside her mind. For most of her life, she had lived on this chemical seesaw. Studios once gave her pills to keep her working endless hours as a young performer. Now, at 46, she felt she could hardly function without them. Before walking on stage, Judy swallowed a mixture of pills and hoped they would balance out in time for the show. When she stepped into the spotlight, the audience gasped softly. She looked incredibly fragile, almost weightless. Her thin legs trembled slightly as she walked in high heels toward Johnny Carson. Instead of a calm handshake, Judy grabbed Johnny's hand tightly and held on. The audience thought it was affection. Johnny immediately felt something else. Her hand was freezing cold and damp with sweat, gripping him with the strength of someone terrified of falling apart in front of millions. Once seated, the chemical storm inside her became obvious. The amphetamines pushed her words out quickly. She spoke fast, laughing loudly, jumping between stories with restless energy. But suddenly, the opposite effect would hit. In the middle of a sentence, her eyes would glaze over for a moment, the barbiturates dragging her down. She blinked slowly, looking confused, as if she had forgotten where she was. For a painful second, the studio fell silent before she forced a laugh to cover the gap. Johnny Carson gently helped guide the conversation forward. He avoided difficult questions and instead helped her move through safe memories. He knew she wasn't well, but he also knew the audience adored her. At one quiet moment, Judy turned toward him and whispered softly, "Johnny, do they still love me?" The question stunned him. It wasn't part of the show. It was the voice of someone who had spent a lifetime entertaining others yet still felt painfully alone. Johnny squeezed her hand gently, reassuring her. He could feel small tremors running through her arm and jaw. Then came the moment that silenced the entire studio. Judy lifted the microphone to sing. She didn't stand up. She remained seated, holding the chair for balance. Her voice, once famous around the world, now sounded rough and breathless. But the emotion inside it was powerful. She sang with everything she had left. When the final note faded, her body slumped back against the chair. The stimulants were wearing off, and exhaustion rushed in. A beautiful performance. What they didn't realize was how close the performer had come to collapse. After the cameras stopped rolling, two assistants hurried onto the stage to help her walk backstage. Her steps were slow and unsteady as she leaned heavily on them. Less than a year later, in June 1969, devastating news arrived. Judy Garland had died in London after an accidental overdose of barbiturates. For those who had seen her on The Tonight Show that night, the memory felt haunting. They hadn't just watched an interview. They had watched a legendary artist struggling to keep going one more time. In the late 1970s, whenever Johnny Carson announced Richard Pryor as the next guest, the entire atmosphere inside the NBC Burbank studio instantly changed. The audience knew they were about to witness comedy history. But the production crew often felt nervous, because walking through that curtain wasn't just a brilliant comedian. It was a man fueled by a powerful new drug spreading through Hollywood at the time: freebase cocaine. Richard Pryor burst onto the stage like a hurricane. He moved quickly, arms flying as he talked, his eyes scanning the room constantly. To the audience, it looked like pure excitement, but inside his chest, his heart was racing at incredible speed. Just minutes earlier in the dressing room, he had taken a powerful hit of freebase cocaine, a chemically altered form of the drug designed to be smoked for an instant and intense effect. The rush hit the brain in seconds. The feeling wasn't normal excitement, it was overwhelming stimulation that made him feel unstoppable, but also deeply paranoid. Johnny Carson watched him carefully, amused but cautious. Richard's eyes were wide and restless, the look of someone whose mind was running much faster than the conversation. Inside his thoughts, doubts flickered. Are they laughing with me or at me? Cocaine could bring massive confidence while also feeding suspicion. Richard turned that chaotic energy into comedy. He joked about drugs, acted out wild scenes of being high, rolled his eyes, and twisted his body into exaggerated movements. The audience roared with laughter, convinced they were watching incredible comedic acting. Richard Pryor often talked about fire. In interviews and on stage, he joked about fire burning everything clean, like a strange prophecy. No one realized that those words would soon become terrifyingly real. On June 9, 1980, during a chaotic freebase cocaine session, Pryor accidentally set himself on fire. Rum spilled over his body and ignited while he was smoking cocaine, leaving him with burns over more than half his body. Years later, he would talk about it in his famous stand-up film Live on the Sunset Strip with painful honesty. But on the night he sat in Johnny Carson's chair, the fire hadn't erupted yet. It was still burning quietly inside his mind. When the interview ended and the closing music played, Richard stood up smiling and waved to the audience. His energy still looked explosive as he spun toward the curtain, but the moment he stepped backstage, the smile disappeared. He leaned against the wall, gasping for air, his heart pounding wildly inside his chest. Sweat poured down his face as an assistant rushed over with a towel. Richard said nothing. His eyes drifted again into that distant, empty stare. The show was over. America had laughed. But waiting for him at home were the same things that had fueled the performance all night: the glass pipe and the blue flame of a lighter. Whenever Johnny Carson introduced Liza with a Z, the NBC orchestra burst into bright Broadway music. Liza Minnelli didn't simply walk onto the stage, she exploded onto it like a firework. Her short haircut, sparkling dress, and huge smile made her look born for the spotlight. The audience clapped along with her endless energy. But beneath the thick makeup and cheerful grin, a silent battle was unfolding. Johnny Carson, who had known her family for years, could sense something behind the performance. Before the show began, Liza had been in the dressing room calming her nerves with Valium and white wine. She carried the legacy of Hollywood royalty, daughter of Judy Garland and director Vincente Minnelli. But she also carried the emotional weight that came with that legacy. On the dressing table next to her glass sat a bottle of Valium, the small yellow pills widely prescribed at the time for anxiety. She relied on them to quiet the racing thoughts in her mind, but Valium slows the body down. To keep up the energetic stage persona everyone expected, Liza pushed herself with alcohol and pure willpower. The result was a strange balance between sedation and forced excitement. More than a few seconds. She leaned toward more than a few seconds. She leaned toward Johnny, grabbed his hand, then leaned back again while laughing loudly. Johnny watched carefully. He saw something familiar in her, the same fragile energy he once saw in her mother. For a brief moment, when Johnny asked about the pressures of constant touring, Liza's smile froze. Fear flickered across her face before she quickly took a sip of water. "Life is wonderful, Johnny. I'm loving it," she said brightly, but her voice trembled slightly at the end. The sedatives dulled her emotions, leaving her in a strange middle ground where she wasn't truly happy or sad. just performing happiness. When the cameras finally cut to commercial, Liza collapsed back into her chair. The alcohol buzz faded quickly, leaving the heavy sedation of Valium behind. An assistant rushed over with a shawl as her shoulders trembled from exhaustion. Looking at her reflection in the monitor, Liza saw something that unsettled her deeply. She saw her mother, Judy Garland, a legendary voice, and a tragic life shaped by pills and pressure. And in that quiet moment, Liza knew she might be walking down the same path. Whenever Sammy Davis Jr. appeared on The Tonight Show, the studio transformed instantly. The band played upbeat jazz, and the audience erupted with excitement. Sammy rushed onto the stage with unstoppable energy, sliding, dancing, and greeting Johnny Carson with enthusiastic hugs. The crowd loved him. But behind that explosive charm was a man running from deep loneliness and personal pain. After a difficult divorce and years of intense pressure in show business, Sammy had turned to a dangerous combination of alcohol and cocaine. In the dressing room before the show, the lively performer looked very different. He sat quietly with tired eyes, staring at the table. Next to a glass of brandy was a thin line of white powder. Sammy inhaled sharply, feeling the drug rush through his body like electricity. Sometimes he also used amyl nitrite inhalants for an instant chemical rush. Within seconds, his heart began racing and the famous showman returned. By the time he walked on stage, the transformation was complete. But sitting beside Johnny Carson, the difference between them was obvious. Johnny sat calmly. Sammy looked like he was sitting on burning coals. He shifted constantly, crossing and uncrossing his legs while gesturing wildly as he spoke. Sweat gathered on his forehead even though the studio was cool. At one point, he pulled out a cigarette and lit it with a gold lighter. If someone looked closely, they might notice something unusual. His pinky fingernail was grown longer than the others. To many viewers, it meant nothing. But inside Hollywood, people knew the reason. It was often used as a tiny scoop for cocaine at parties. Johnny Carson noticed it immediately. He also noticed the restless movements and the beads of sweat. He understood exactly what kind of night Sammy was having. To the audience watching across America, Sammy Davis Jr. looked like the happiest entertainer alive. But when the cameras stopped and the red light turned off, the performance ended instantly. Sammy dropped his head into his hands. His small body shook from exhaustion and the crash that followed the high. He was still Mr. Show Business. But behind the spotlight, he was also a man trapped in a cycle he couldn't easily escape. In the late 1970s, Star Wars exploded across the world and turned its actors into instant icons. Carrie Fisher became Princess Leia, the fearless leader with the famous cinnamon bun hairstyle. To millions of fans, she looked strong, confident, and pure. But when Carrie arrived at NBC's Burbank studio for The Tonight Show, the reality behind the scenes was very different. She was a sharp, funny young woman hiding intense pressure and a dangerous secret. Carrie wasn't just fighting villains on screen. She was battling powerful substances that had begun creeping into her life, cocaine and lingering psychedelic effects from LSD. Back in the dressing room, she paced non-stop across the floor. Her heels clicked rapidly as her heart pounded in the same frantic rhythm. She had just come from an all-night Hollywood party where cocaine flowed freely. Being the daughter of legendary star Debbie Reynolds brought enormous pressure. Carrie often coped with that pressure by diving headfirst into the chaotic party scene. Before the curtain opened, she made sure to take another quick dose. She wanted to be sharp, funny, and unforgettable on television. Because tonight, millions of people were watching. And Princess Leia had to be the most interesting guest in the galaxy. The numbing sensation spread from Carrie Fisher's nose down into her throat. The bitter chemical taste of cocaine told her the rush was beginning. Her mind suddenly felt sharp and unstoppable. Thoughts raced faster than normal, every idea firing rapidly like sparks. When Johnny Carson called her name, Carrie walked onto the stage with explosive confidence. She sat down beside him, but her body radiated tension. Her hands clasped together, then unclasped, then moved to fix her hair again. Her eyes darted around the studio constantly. That was the effect of strong stimulants, every sense pushed into overdrive. The lights looked brighter, the laughter sounded louder. Sometimes, in brief flashes, colorful distortions from past LSD experiences flickered at the edge of her vision. For a moment, Johnny Carson's face almost looked surreal. The audience loved her intelligence and quick humor. They laughed constantly, thinking they were watching the natural wit of a brilliant young star. But Johnny Carson had interviewed thousands of guests, and he noticed something unusual. Every few minutes, Carrie's finger rose to lightly touch her nose, or she sniffed quietly like someone fighting a cold. It was subtle, but it was also a common reflex among cocaine users when the drug numbs the nasal passages. Carrie disguised it well. Sometimes she covered it with a hair flip, sometimes with a laugh. She was acting. Right there on national television, she was playing the role of a completely sober guest. When the interview ended, Carrie stood up and shook Johnny's hand. Sight, her shoulders dropped. The sight, her shoulders dropped. The artificial energy began fading. She leaned against the wall, rubbing her temple as the beginning of a headache formed. Had she fooled Johnny Carson? Had she fooled America? Probably. The audience had only seen a clever, confident princess from a galaxy far away. But Carrie knew the real battle would return later that night. When the lights were off and the silence returned, the temptation would be waiting again, the same white powder she used to escape the loneliness of fame. By the mid-1980s, Chevy Chase looked like a man who had conquered Hollywood. The tall comedian who rose to fame on Saturday Night Live had become a massive star through films like Caddyshack and National Lampoon's Vacation. When Chevy walked into Johnny Carson's studio, he carried the swagger of someone used to winning. But behind the confident attitude was a man fighting constant physical pain. Back in the dressing room, the quiet space was broken by the rattle of pills. Chevy looked into the mirror while adjusting his collar. Moments earlier, he had swallowed Percodan, a powerful painkiller prescribed for severe back pain. Years of dangerous physical comedy and hard falls during his early career had left his spine damaged. Without medication, the pain could become unbearable. But the drug came with a problem. Painkillers slowed him down and made him tired. To counter that sluggish feeling and keep his sharp comedic persona alive, Chevy turned to another substance, cocaine. A quick line delivered an immediate rush of energy. The mixture created a strange balance, pain suppressed by medication, while stimulants pushed his mind into an aggressive alertness. When he walked onto the stage, Chevy didn't greet the audience warmly. Instead, he strolled in with his hands in his pockets and a confident smirk. That attitude had become his trademark. But Johnny Carson noticed something else. Chevy's walk looked stiff, not relaxed, careful. When he sat down, he moved slowly, keeping his back straight. The pain was still there, even if the medication had pushed it deeper into the background. The conversation began, and something unusual happened. Under the influence of stimulants, Chevy felt unusually confident. He responded with short answers, sometimes sharp and sarcastic. To him, it felt clever, but the tone occasionally sounded colder than usual. Johnny tapped his pencil lightly against the desk, a small sign of irritation. He sensed something was off. Chevy stared at Johnny with an unblinking gaze. Behind the arrogance was something else entirely: fear. Chevy knew he depended on those pills and stimulants just to function. He remembered days stuck in bed, unable to move because of his back. The memory terrified him. His entire career had been built on falling for laughs. Now he was falling into a different kind of trap. Every time the audience laughed at one of his jokes, he felt relief. Laughter worked better than medication. When the interview ended, Chevy stood up slowly and stretched. To the audience, it looked casual. In reality, he was checking whether his back would hold. He shook Johnny's hand briefly and turned toward the backstage hallway. As soon as he was out of sight, the confident smile disappeared. His hand reached behind him to clutch his lower back. The pain had returned. The arrogant stage persona was gone. Now he was simply a man leaning against a wall, exhausted and hurting, preparing for another long night. When the theme music faded and the NBC studio finally went dark, the applause disappeared. What remained was something rarely seen by the audience. Behind the glamour of television, many legendary guests carried invisible struggles. 8 famous performers, 8 different lives, each one sitting in the same chair, wearing a brilliant smile while hiding battles that most viewers never imagined. Johnny Carson witnessed many of those moments silently. He rarely spoke about them. But the old footage still exists. Glimpses of stars shining brightly while quietly fighting their own shadows.